On FOIA.gov, you can compare the number of FOIA requests handled by agencies each year. The data available to you includes the number of FOIA requests received, processed, and pending at the beginning or end of the fiscal year. The number of requests received during a given year is very simple. It includes every request that was sent into the agency that year. The number of requests processed is a little different. It includes the requests the agency has finished processing. In other words, if an agency receives a request during the year but doesn't finish all of its work on it during that same year, the request will count as received but not as processed because the agency has not yet taken final action. Any request on which an agency is working is considered pending. To get information under the FOIA, typically you must make a FOIA request. Now, this is a written request in which you describe the information you want and the format you want it in as much detail as possible. You should be aware that the FOIA does not require agencies to do research for you, to analyze data or answer written questions, or to create records in response to your request. Finally, you should know that the FOIA requires that federal agencies release certain information automatically without the need for you to make a request. So before you send in that FOIA request, it's a good idea to look at agency websites first and see what's already available online. After an agency receives your FOIA request, you will usually receive a letter acknowledging the request with an assigned tracking number. If the agency requires additional information before it can begin to process your request, it will contact you. The agency will typically search for records in response to your request and then review them to determine which records or parts of records can be released to you. The agency will redact or black out any information protected from disclosure by one of the FOIA's 9 exemptions. The releasable records will then be sent to you. You should always feel free to contact the agency if you have any questions at all about your request. The agency's FOIA staff are available to explain the FOIA process to you, to provide information about the status of your request, and to assist you in understanding how your request is being handled. Congress established certain categories of information that are not required to be released in response to a FOIA request, when release would be harmful to government or private interests. These categories are called exemptions. There are 9 categories of exempt information, and they cover information such as classified documents, personal privacy information, trade secrets, privileged communications, and law enforcement interests. Now, even if an exemption applies, the Attorney General has encouraged all agencies to use their discretion and release information if there's no foreseeable harm in doing so and when disclosure is not otherwise prohibited by the law. There's no charge to submit a FOIA request, but in certain instances, full FOIA processing may require a modest charge. Although there's usually no charge for the first 2 hours of search time and the first 100 pages of duplication, agencies do typically charge for the time it takes to search for records or for duplication of those records after this initial allotment runs out. If you are seeking records for commercial use, you will be charged additional fees. Now, that said, you may always include in your request letter a statement limiting the amount that you are willing to pay in fees, or you may request a waiver of fees. Generally, fee waivers are limited to situations in which you can show that the disclosure of the information is in the public interest. That means it's likely to contribute significantly to public understanding of the operations and activities of the government. The time it takes to respond to each request varies depending on the complexity of the request itself and the backlog of requests already pending at the agency. In some circumstances, the agency will be able to respond to the request within the standard time limit established by the FOIA, which is approximately 1 month. In other instances, more time may be needed before the request can be completed. When an agency requires an extension of time, it will notify you in writing and give you an opportunity to modify or limit the scope of your request. Alternatively, you may agree to a different timetable for the processing of your request. Under certain conditions, you may be entitled to have your request processed on an expedited basis. The websites for each agency can provide more information on this process. Each fiscal year, agencies receive and process thousands of requests. Sometimes an agency will be able to respond within the statutory time limit established by the FOIA, which is about a month. Although agencies make every effort to respond to FOIA requests as quickly as possible, in some cases they simply cannot do so within the time allotted. In these situations, the requests are considered backlogged. The backlog data on FOIA.gov will show you how many requests were pending beyond the statutory time period at the end of the fiscal year. When an agency locates a record as a result of a FOIA request that contains information of interest to another agency, the other agency must review the record before it can be released. This process, where an agency sends a record to another agency for review, is called a consultation. Consultations are tracked in the same way that requests are on FOIA.gov. When running a report on consultations, you can see how many consultations are currently in the backlog at an agency at the beginning of the fiscal year, how many are received, how many are reprocessed, and how many are pending at the end of the fiscal year. If you have questions about your request or are dissatisfied with the way it was handled, you have several options. First, you may contact the FOIA professional handling the request or the FOIA contact provided by the agency. You may also contact the agency's FOIA public liaison, who is there to explain the process to you, to assist in reducing any delays, and to help resolve any disputes. Often, a simple discussion between you and the agency will resolve any issues that may arise. Filing an appeal is also very simple. Typically, all you need to do is send a letter to the appellate authority stating that you are appealing the initial decision made on your request. There's no fee or cost involved. After an independent review, the appellate authority will send you a letter advising you of its decision. Once the administrative appeal process is complete, you also have the option to seek mediation services from the Office of Government Information Services at the National Archives and Records Administration. The Freedom of Information Act, which is commonly known as the FOIA, is a law that gives you the right to access information from the federal government. It's often described as a law that keeps citizens in the know about what their government is doing. Under the FOIA, agencies must release any information that is requested unless that information is protected from disclosure by law. The FOIA also requires that agencies automatically disclose certain information, including frequently requested records. As Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court have all recognized, the FOIA is a vital part of our democracy. On FOIA.gov, you'll find the data contained in annual reports submitted by federal departments and agencies to the Department of Justice. These reports contain a detailed look at the numbers of requests received, how they were handled by the agency, as well as information on processing times, backlogs, fees, and the personnel needed to comply with the FOIA. Within each of these categories, there are different data sets that can be explored through FOIA.gov. For example, you can run reports to find out how many FOIA requests were received by a particular agency, to learn how many different times agencies used a particular FOIA exemption, or to compare the average processing times for FOIA requests across multiple agencies. You can use the available FOIA data to generate new reports and comparisons across agencies and over time. FOIA.gov is a government-wide portal for the Freedom of Information Act that was developed as part of the Department of Justice's Open Government Plan. At FOIA.gov, the public has access to all the FOIA data collected by the Department of Justice on behalf of the federal government. You can view, sort, and search through the FOIA data. You can generate new or comparative reports. You can learn about how the FOIA works and how to make a FOIA request to federal agencies. Finally, you can explore significant FOIA releases that have been made as a result of past requests. Once the agency has processed your request and any fee issues have been resolved, the agency will send you a written response, including all the documents that can be released to you. The response letter will advise you whether any information is being withheld because of the exemptions allowed by the FOIA. The letter will also give you an estimate of the amount of material that has been withheld. When a portion of a record has been withheld, typically the page will be marked to let you know what exemptions have been applied. Now, at the same time, the agency will also advise you what you can do if you aren't satisfied with the response. There's no one place to send all FOIA requests. Each federal agency handles its own records in response to requests. Your request will receive the quickest possible response if it is addressed directly to the agency and office that you believe has the records you are seeking. The general rule is that any person, citizen or not, can make a FOIA request. It's easy to do so. There's no specific form that must be used to make a request. The request simply must be in writing, must reasonably describe the information sought, and must comply with any specific agency requirements. Most federal agencies now accept FOIA requests electronically, including by web form, email, or fax. If you want records about yourself, you will be required to provide proof of your identity in order to protect your privacy and to ensure that private information about you is not disclosed to someone else. Since it was passed in 1966, the FOIA has evolved through congressional amendments and judicial interpretations. It is the executive branch, led by the President, that's responsible for the administration of the FOIA across the government. So what is the President's policy? Simply put, President Obama has pledged to make this the most transparent administration in history. Now, in that spirit, Attorney General Eric Holder, the head of the Department of Justice, has directed agencies to apply a presumption of openness to every FOIA request. That standard favors disclosure whenever possible. The Attorney General has also encouraged agencies to make more information available online without the need for people to have to make FOIA requests. The Justice Department's Office of Information Policy oversees agency compliance with these directives and encourages all agencies to fully comply with both the letter and the spirit of the FOIA, a spirit of transparency that makes our democracy unique. There's no central office in the government that handles FOIA requests for all federal departments and agencies. Instead, each federal agency processes its own records in response to FOIA requests. There are many different officials at these agencies who work really hard every day to make sure that the FOIA works. There are the FOIA professionals who search for and process records in response to the FOIA requests. There are FOIA public liaisons and FOIA contacts who work with FOIA requesters to answer questions and resolve concerns. And there are chief FOIA officers who oversee their agency's compliance with the FOIA.